All right, guys, there was a small section left in your notes after you watched all the videos that was not on any of the previous videos. So here is that last little section. You might have to backtrack a little bit. This is Roman numeral 3, relationships in a community. We're going to talk about symbiotic relationships. So go to the section of your notes that has this section in it. So a symbiotic relationship is really a very broad term for a relationship between two or more organisms that are kind of within the same community. It doesn't that word alone doesn't speculate on the nature of the relationships, just that two or more individuals are connected together in some kind of relationship. So to figure out what kind of relationship, we got to get a little more specific with our terminology. So these are maybe words that you've heard before. The first symbiotic relationship I want to talk about is called mutualism. So you hear the word mutual in this, and really what we're talking about here is that both organisms in the relationship are mutually benefiting from the relationship. And you can see this little section of the notes right here. Sometimes these symbiotic relationships are denoted in shorthand as pluses and minuses in sort of a parentheses set. So this is a mutualistic relationship where plus plus, both organisms positively benefit from that relationship. So the example that I'll give you is this top picture right here, the sea anemone and a clownfish. So this is Nemo, right? If we've seen the movie Finding Nemo or Finding Dory, both organisms are benefiting here. So the clownfish benefits from the protection of the sea anemone. It lives in the sea anemone. The sea anemone can sting organisms. And so as long as the clownfish is in the anemone, it gets protection from that part of the relationship. The anemone gets sort of brushed. If you remember in the movie Finding Nemo, the dad fish says, make sure that you brush, and Nemo like rubs his body up against the sea anemone. So that in part helps the clownfish to not be stung by the anemone. It's sort of a built up resistance, but it's also kind of cleaning that anemone, and the in the brushing process can sort of pull any bacteria, any debris off of that clownfish, and maybe even use it as a meal. So both organisms are benefiting here in this relationship. The next symbiotic one that I want to talk about is parasitism. And so in parasitism, this is the word parasite, right? So one organism is going to benefit in the relationship at the expense of the other. The other will be harmed. And so here's our parentheses shorthand here, positive for the one that benefits, the parasite, and the negative for the host that is being harmed. So think about any parasitic relationship. I've given you the picture here of a tick that is going to act as a parasite, latch onto a host, and draw a blood meal from that host. Commensalism is the next relationship that I want to talk about. This is where one organism will benefit and the other in the relationship really is neutral. It's not helped or harmed. And so our shorthand is positive for the one that is helped, and then 0 to represent sort of a neutral or net zero response is the organism that isn't helped or harmed. And the example down here of a commensalism relationship are barnacles that grow on the back of humpback whales. The humpback whales aren't really harmed by those barnacles. They're also not really helped by those barnacles. So it's a pretty neutral effect, but the barnacles are helped. So barnacles are filter feeders, and barnacles are also stationary. They grow on things, and wherever those things are, that's where they live. And so to be a barnacle and to grow on a stationary object like a dock, you're going to only have access to the food that is brought to you in the water. But if you root yourself on something that is moving, like the humpback whale, you have the benefit of expanding the area that you can then feed from. So that's a commensalism relationship. I want to talk about competition, which isn't typically thought of as a symbiotic relationship. But if we go back to the root of just two organisms interacting with each other, competition works. So, where both organisms are competing for resources, it can lead to a couple of things, but this relationship in general is seen as a negative negative because you are competing. Now, there's going to be a winner, hopefully, and perhaps that winner gains access to the resources and eventually receives a positive outcome. But the act of competing is energy expenditure and is seen as negative, negative. What can competition lead to? Well, a couple of things. The first is called competitive exclusion. In competitive exclusion, essentially, the organisms can't coexist. And so competition occurs. One is going to gain access to the resources. The other is either going to die because it can't really go anywhere, or it's going to pick up and move away and go find its own set of resources. So a really famous experiment right up here illustrated in these graphs showed competitive exclusion. So this is P. aurelia. This is a little aquatic microorganism. When it was growing alone in an environment, here's its growth curve. So we see a logistic growth curve with carrying capacity that's pretty high. Here's a different species of that same microorganism, P. caudatum. It did the exact same thing when grown alone. Down here, we see what happens if we grow them together. We see competitive exclusion. We see that the P. aurelia was able to maintain and grow as it previously did, but the P. caudatum could not. And so in this case, they grew to a certain point and then they started to die because of the lack of resource availability. P. aurelia was accessing those resources better for some reason. So that's competitive exclusion, one potential outcome of competition. The other is called resource or niche partitioning, and that's what we see down here. This is a little more of a strategy where if we can subdivide